Have you ever noticed how the kindest people often carry the deepest pain? How the ones who smile the most are the ones who've cried the hardest in silence? There's something unsettling about the fact that the good ones, those who are honest, gentle, and selfless, seem to suffer more than anyone else. It's not just coincidence. It's not just bad luck. There's something deeper happening under the surface, something psychological, something existential, something Dostoevsky tried to wrestle with in his writings. Because when someone says life is fair, it's clear they haven't lived long enough. Dostoevsky believed suffering was inseparable from the human condition. But not all suffering is equal. There's a kind that comes from living with awareness, from carrying a conscience too heavy for a cruel world. Good people don't suffer because they are weak. They suffer because they feel more. They think more. They care more. You see, the wicked, the indifferent, the liars and the arrogant, they don't lose sleep over the harm they cause. They walk away from damage like it's just part of the game. But the good? They carry guilt even when they've done nothing wrong. They overthink their words, doubt their decisions, worry if they hurt someone even accidentally. Their moral compass is too sensitive, and in a world built on noise, speed, and competition, sensitivity becomes a curse. Dostoevsky once said, "The darker the night, the brighter the stars. The deeper the grief, the closer is God." But let's set aside the spiritual angle for a second. What he meant was, there's a depth to pain that only good people reach, because they're the only ones who are truly awake. In a way, goodness and suffering are psychologically linked. Good people are idealists. They believe in fairness, in justice, in kindness. They expect the world to reflect their internal values. But the world is indifferent, cold, often brutal. And that clash between expectation and reality, that's where suffering is born. That's where the idealist dies a little inside. Every time. Bad people don't suffer like this. They expect betrayal. They prepare for it. They lie before you can lie to them. They manipulate because they believe everyone's doing it. But a good person walks into life with open hands, and those hands get burned. Dostoevsky didn't romanticize suffering. He didn't say pain makes you noble. He simply exposed the truth. That good people don't just endure more pain, they process it more deeply. They don't deflect it. They absorb it. They question why the world is like this, why people betray each other, why love turns to cruelty, why innocence dies in places it should have flourished. The good suffer because they're not armored, because they don't numb themselves to survive, because they still have the audacity to care. And that's not a weakness, it's a kind of tragic strength. But the real twist, sometimes good people blame themselves for their own suffering. That's the Dostoevskian trap. They internalize everything. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I deserved it. Maybe I'm just not enough. And society loves that. It teaches the kind-hearted to believe their pain is self-inflicted, that their suffering is a flaw instead of a reflection of their depth. It's not a coincidence that the most compassionate people are also the most depressed, or that those who help others the most are often the ones who silently drown. They give without receiving. They listen without being heard. They stay up comforting others while no one asks if they're okay. Their suffering becomes invisible, hidden behind the mask of the strong one, the understanding one, the one who always has it together. And maybe that's why people keep hurting them. Because they don't scream. They don't fight back. They just endure. Dostoevsky saw this in his own life. Prison, poverty, illness, loss. He saw how suffering strips you bare, how it reveals what you truly are. And for good people, that's often a revelation they weren't prepared for, because they expect light. And instead, they find a darkness that doesn't go away. But here's the most painful truth. The world uses good people. It consumes their warmth, their forgiveness, their empathy, like a resource. And when they break, when they burn out, it replaces them. Quietly, without thanks. Because the good are easy to overlook, easy to forget. They don't make noise. They don't demand attention. They just disappear. And still, they keep giving. That's what makes their suffering so unbearable. They still believe in love, even after heartbreak. They still try to be kind, even after being used. They still see beauty in life, even when life gives them every reason to become bitter. In psychology, this is a form of cognitive dissonance, holding on to moral ideals in a reality that punishes those very ideals, creates internal chaos. But instead of abandoning those values, good people cling to them harder. Not because they're foolish, but because it's the only way they can stay true to who they are. And that's where Dostoevsky's insight cuts deepest. He believed that to be truly human is to suffer. But more than that, to be good is to suffer more. Not because goodness is punished, but because goodness is fragile. And in a world that rewards hardness, fragility bleeds. Yet, despite all this, despite the betrayal, the loneliness, the invisible tears, good people rarely change into something worse. That's what's most haunting. They suffer, yes, but they don't abandon their soul. Even when they're shattered, they don't shatter others. Even when no one is watching, they still choose what's right. They forgive without being asked. They show up without being noticed. They love without being loved back. And that's why they suffer more. Because they're playing a game where the rules are rigged against them. But they keep playing anyway, not to win, but because they can't become someone else. They don't stop. Even when they're tired. Even when they've been betrayed a dozen times over. Even when the silence after they help someone is louder than any thank you they'll ever hear. There's a quiet tragedy in that kind of endurance. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind of tragedy, but the slow, invisible one. The kind that eats you from the inside. The kind that no one writes poems about. The kind where the hero never gets the credit, never gets the closure, never gets the happy ending. They just keep going. Quietly, patiently, almost stubbornly. Dostoevsky knew that goodness isn't rewarded in any fair way. In fact, it's often punished. Why? Because it makes others uncomfortable. Because true kindness, real, selfless, unflinching goodness, reflects a light that exposes everyone else's darkness. And people hate being exposed. The kind person becomes a mirror. And when people see their own lack of empathy reflected back, they lash out. They accuse the good of being naive, of being weak, of being fake. But deep down, it's guilt. It's projection. It's the shame of not being able to be that good themselves. There's another layer to this suffering, the isolation. Because the better you are, the more alone you become. Why? Because your standards rise. You can't tolerate lies. You can't play games. You can't fake it. And so, people start to leave. Or worse, they pretend to care, then disappear when you need them most. This creates a paradox. Good people long for connection, yet their depth repels the shallow. Their honesty unnerves the fake. Their loyalty embarrasses the opportunistic. And so, they end up surrounded by silence. Not because they're unworthy of love, but because their presence demands a kind of emotional maturity that most people never reach. They don't ask for much. Just honesty, respect, a little consistency. But even that, in today's world, feels like asking for the moon. So they retreat. Not because they want to, but because every door they knocked on turned out to be empty. They become quiet observers. They become the ones who feel everything but say nothing. The ones who help everyone but never ask for help themselves. The ones who break silently at night and wake up the next day like nothing happened. They become invisible. And maybe that's the cruelest part. The invisibility of their suffering. How it goes unnoticed. How people say, "You're so strong," when in reality, they're barely holding on. How they become a support system for everyone else, while their own needs are buried 6 feet under. Dostoevsky believed that the capacity to suffer deeply was also the capacity to love deeply, that the very same soul that breaks is the soul that holds the greatest beauty. But he also knew that this beauty comes at a price, a devastating one, because the world doesn't understand this kind of soul. It doesn't reward it. It exploits it. And over time, the good person begins to wonder, what's the point? What's the point of being good when good people get hurt the most? What's the point of staying kind when kindness is seen as a weakness? What's the point of giving when all you get in return is silence? These questions don't get answered, not in any satisfying way. But the good continue anyway. Not because it makes sense, not because it's fair, but because they can't betray who they are. They can't become what hurt them. That's the final layer of their suffering, the refusal to become numb. To be good in a cruel world is to be in a constant state of internal rebellion. It's to walk through life open-hearted in a world that thrives on closed fists. It's to be a flickering light in a room full of shadows. And that light draws the moths and the monsters alike. They'll take advantage. They'll drain you. They'll mistake your compassion for permission. And still, you'll give. Because the alternative is worse. Because to stop being good would mean becoming someone you don't recognize. And that's the last thing a good person wants, to lose their soul trying to protect it. So they suffer. And not because they deserve it, but because they carry what others can't. Because they hold pain that doesn't belong to them. Because they believe that love is still worth it, even when it's one-sided. Because they believe the world can be better, even if it never is. And maybe, just maybe, there's something sacred about that kind of suffering. Not holy, not rewarded, not poetic, just real. The quiet suffering of someone who refuses to give up on humanity, even when humanity has given up on them. That's why good people suffer more. Because their hearts weren't built for war, but they keep walking through battlefields anyway. Because they see beauty in things long after others have stopped looking. Because their pain isn't a weakness, it's a reflection of how deeply they've chosen to live. And most of all, because even if the world never changes, they will never stop trying to be the one who does. So the next time you see someone who always puts others first, who never complains, who seems to carry pain like a second skin, look closer. Chances are you're looking at a soul that's been tested by life more than most. And yet, they chose not to become cruel. They chose not to harden. They chose to remain good. That's why good people suffer more. Because they never stop trying to make the world a little less cruel, even when that world keeps breaking their heart.